was loyal, she was innocent, but she was cast out, and no one questioned it. What if the king realized the truth? Only when it was too late to make it right. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The morning mist clung to the stone walls of Thornwall Castle like a shroud of secrets, thick and impenetrable as the fog rolled across the Yorkshire moors that surrounded the ancient fortress. The year was 1347, and the castle stood as a testament to generations of English nobility, its grey towers piercing the overcast sky with an authority that had remained unchallenged for centuries. Within those formidable walls, the daily rituals of court life proceeded with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance, each servant and noble knowing their place in the intricate hierarchy that governed their existence. Isolde Whitmore moved through the corridors of the castle with the grace and confidence of someone who had spent her entire 22 years within its confines. Her slender figure was draped in a dress of deep forest green wool, its long sleeves bordered with delicate embroidery that spoke of careful craftsmanship. The garment hung in elegant layers, cinched at the waist with a leather belt adorned with bronze fittings, and the hem brushed against the cold stone floors as she walked. Her dark auburn hair, thick and lustrous, was partially concealed beneath a simple linen coif, though several rebellious strands had escaped to frame her face. That face, with its high cheekbones, full lips, and eyes the color of warm honey, had caught the attention of many in the castle, though Isolde herself seemed largely unaware of the effect she had on others. She had served as a lady's maid to Queen Margaret for the past 7 years, ever since her mother, who had held the same position, had succumbed to fever during a particularly harsh winter. Isolde had inherited not only her mother's position but also her reputation for integrity, discretion, and unwavering loyalty to the crown. The queen trusted her implicitly, often confiding in her matters that she shared with no one else, not even her closest noble companions. This trust was a treasure that Isolde guarded fiercely, understanding that in the treacherous waters of court politics, such confidence was both a blessing and a burden. On this particular morning, Isolde made her way to the queen's chambers, carrying a silver tray laden with warm bread, honeyed mead, and preserved fruits. The corridors were already bustling with activity as servants prepared for the day ahead. Torches flickered in their iron sconces, casting dancing shadows on the tapestries that depicted great battles and noble hunts. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, beeswax candles, and the earthy smell of rushes that covered the floors, mixed with dried herbs to mask less pleasant odors. As she approached the heavy oak door to the queen's private chambers, Isolde paused to compose herself, as she did every morning. She knew that Queen Margaret's moods could be as changeable as the English weather, and it was essential to read the atmosphere before entering. Taking a deep breath, she knocked 3 times, the sound echoing softly in the corridor. "Enter," came the queen's voice, tired but not unkind. Isolde pushed open the door and stepped into the warmth of the chamber. A large hearth dominated one wall, its fire crackling merrily and casting a golden glow throughout the room. The chamber was furnished with all the luxury befitting a queen. Thick furs covered the bed, intricate tapestries hung from the walls, and carved wooden furniture polished to a high sheen spoke of wealth and power. Queen Margaret sat at her dressing table, still in her sleeping gown, a heavy robe of midnight blue velvet trimmed with ermine draped over her shoulders. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Isolde said softly, curtsying before setting the tray down on a nearby table. "I've brought your breakfast. The bread is fresh from the ovens, and cook has sent up the last of the autumn honey." Queen Margaret turned from her reflection in the polished silver mirror, her delicate features drawn with fatigue. At 38, she remained a beautiful woman, though the years of court life and the burden of producing an heir had taken their toll. Her blonde hair, streaked with threads of silver, fell in loose waves past her shoulders, and her blue eyes, though shadowed with weariness, still held a sharp intelligence. "Thank you, Isolde," the queen said, managing a small smile. "You are always so thoughtful. I confess I did not sleep well last night. The wind howling through the towers reminded me of spirits crying out for the dead." Isolde moved to pour the mead into a silver goblet, her movements smooth and practiced. "The autumn winds are always fierce this time of year, Your Majesty, but they will pass, as they always do, and soon winter will settle over us with its quiet snow." "Ever the optimist," Queen Margaret observed. accepting the goblet from Isolde's hands. "It is one of the qualities I most appreciate in you. In this court of schemers and flatterers, your honesty is like a cool drink of water in a parched land." Isolde felt warmth bloom in her chest at the compliment, but she kept her expression neutral. "I serve only to bring your majesty comfort and peace, as my mother did before me." The queen sipped her mead, her gaze distant. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. I still miss her wisdom, though you have proven yourself worthy of her legacy." She paused, setting down the goblet. "Tell me, has there been any word from the king this morning?" "I believe his majesty is in council with his advisers," Isolde replied carefully. "Lord Pembroke and Sir Edmund arrived before dawn, and there has been much activity in the Great Hall." Queen Margaret's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. There is always some urgent matter that requires his attention. Military campaigns, tax collections, disputes between nobles. The business of ruling never ceases." There was a note of bitterness in her voice that Isolde had learned to recognize over the years. "Your Majesty's presence is equally important to the kingdom," Isolde said gently. "The people look to you for grace and compassion, qualities that temper His Majesty's strength." The Queen's eyes softened. "You always know what to say, don't you? Very well. Help me dress. I suppose I must make an appearance at court, even if my husband barely notices whether I am there or not." Isolde moved to the large wardrobe and began selecting garments for the Queen's attire. She chose a gown of deep crimson wool, richly embroidered with gold thread and patterns of roses and vines. The dress was cut in the latest fashion, with long fitted sleeves that would be laced at the wrists, a low square neckline that would be modest yet elegant, and a full skirt that would flow gracefully when the Queen walked. To complement this, Isolde selected an overcoat of dark gray wool lined with fox fur, perfect for the chill that pervaded the castle despite the fires that burned in every hearth. As she helped the Queen into her undergarments and then began the process of lacing her into the crimson gown, Isolde's mind wandered to the mysteries of court life that she had observed over the years. King Edward was a complicated man, powerful and decisive in matters of state, yet distant and cold in his personal relationships. He was 45 years old, still robust and commanding, with the build of a warrior who had spent his youth on battlefields. His dark hair was now streaked with gray, and his face bore the lines of a man who carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. "Tighter," Queen Margaret instructed, and Isolde pulled the laces more firmly, creating the fashionable silhouette that court expected. "I must look my best if I am to endure another day of sidelong glances and whispered conversations that cease the moment I approach." "Your Majesty is the most elegant woman in the kingdom," Isolde said with complete sincerity. "There is no one who could rival your grace." Once the Queen was fully dressed, her hair arranged in an elaborate style with a golden circlet resting atop her head, Isolde stepped back to admire her work. Queen Margaret looked every inch the monarch she was, regal and untouchable. Yet Isolde could see the loneliness in her eyes, the sadness that no amount of finery could disguise. "Will you walk with me to the Great Hall?" the Queen asked, and there was something almost vulnerable in the request. "Of course, Your Majesty. It would be my honor." They left the chambers together, moving through the castle's winding corridors. Guards in leather armor and wool surcoats bearing the king's crest of a golden lion on a field of blue stood at attention as they passed. Other servants bowed and curtsied, their eyes downcast in respect. The castle was a world unto itself, a complex hierarchy where everyone had their place and stepping out of line could result in swift and severe consequences. As they descended a broad stone staircase, the sounds of the great hall grew louder. Voices raised in discussion, the clatter of dishes being set out for the morning meal, the barking of hunting dogs that some nobles kept at their sides. The great hall was the heart of castle life, a massive room with soaring ceilings supported by thick wooden beams. Tapestries depicting the king's ancestors and their great deeds covered the stone walls, and at the far end, on a raised dais, sat two ornate chairs, the thrones from which the king and queen presided over their court. King Edward was already present, standing near his throne in deep conversation with several of his advisers. He cut an impressive figure in his tunic of black wool embroidered with golden thread, a heavy cloak of dark green lined with wolf fur hanging from his broad shoulders. A wide leather belt studded with gold held a sword at his side, the weapon more ceremonial than practical at court. yet its presence served as a reminder of the king's martial prowess. His face was strong and angular, with a prominent nose and a jaw that spoke of determination and authority. His dark eyes missed nothing, taking in every detail of the room even as he conversed with Lord Pembroke. When Queen Margaret entered, there was a momentary pause in the conversations around the hall. Nobles and courtiers turned to acknowledge her presence, bowing or curtsying as appropriate. The king glanced up briefly, gave a curt nod of recognition, and then returned to his discussion as if his wife's arrival was of no particular importance. Isolde felt a flash of indignation on the queen's behalf, but she kept her expression carefully neutral as she helped arrange the queen's skirts when she settled into her throne. This casual dismissal was not unusual. King Edward was a man consumed by the duties of kingship, and matters of the heart seemed to hold little interest for him. It was common knowledge in the castle that the royal marriage, while politically advantageous, lacked warmth and affection. "You may attend to your other duties," Queen Margaret said quietly to Isolde. "I will send for you if I have need." Isolde curtsied and withdrew, making her way along the edge of the great hall toward the servants' quarters. As she walked, she couldn't help but notice the various groups of nobles clustered throughout the room, their voices low as they discussed whatever intrigue currently occupied the court. Power plays, marriage alliances, land disputes, all the complicated machinery of noble life ground on ceaselessly. Near one of the large windows that looked out over the courtyard, Isolde spotted a figure she had not seen before. He stood slightly apart from the others, a tall man with the bearing of a warrior. His clothing marked him as a person of some importance, a tunic of deep burgundy wool beneath a leather jerkin reinforced with steel studs, practical yet well made. A thick cloak of charcoal gray wool hung from his shoulders, pinned with a bronze brooch worked in an intricate Celtic knot pattern. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, falling to his shoulders, and even from a distance, Isolde could see that his face was striking, all sharp planes and strong features that spoke of both nobility and strength. As Isolde passed through the great hall, her eyes were drawn back to the stranger despite her best efforts to maintain the proper demeanor of a servant. There was something magnetic about his presence, a quality that set him apart from the other nobles who preened and postured in their finery. He stood with the relaxed confidence of a man accustomed to danger, his hand resting casually on the pommel of the sword at his hip. The weapon was clearly not ceremonial like the king's. Its leather-wrapped grip showed signs of use, and the scabbard bore the scuff marks of countless draws and sheathings. The stranger's gaze swept across the hall with the practiced efficiency of someone assessing threats and opportunities, and for a brief moment, his eyes met Isolde's. They were the color of storm clouds over the sea, gray with flecks of blue, and held an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. She quickly lowered her gaze and continued walking, feeling her cheeks warm with an unfamiliar flush. It was improper for a servant to stare at a nobleman, and she silently chastised herself for the lapse in judgment. As she reached the doorway that led to the servants' corridor, she heard a booming voice call out across the hall, "Lord Aldrich Blackthorne, welcome to Thornwall Castle. It has been too long since you graced our court with your presence." Isolde couldn't resist glancing back. King Edward had broken away from his advisors and was striding across the hall toward the stranger, his expression more animated than she had seen in months. The two men clasped forearms in the warrior's greeting, and the king clapped Lord Aldrich on the shoulder with genuine warmth. "Your Majesty," Lord Aldrich replied, his voice deep and resonant, carrying easily across the hall despite not being raised. "I came as soon as I received your summons. The journey from the northern territories was long, but I would not delay when my king calls." "Excellent, excellent," King Edward said. "We have much to discuss. The situation with the Scottish border grows more precarious by the day, and I need men I can trust to help maintain order. Your reputation for military strategy precedes you." Isolde ducked into the servants' corridor, her mind racing with questions. Lord Aldrich Blackthorne. The name was unfamiliar to her, which meant he was likely not a regular presence at court. A northern lord, then, one of those hardy nobles who spent more time defending the border than dancing attendance on the king. Such men were rare at Thornwall, preferring their own lands to the political machinations of the royal court. What business could have brought him here now? She made her way through the narrow passages that honeycombed the castle, the domain of servants who kept the great fortress running smoothly. Here the walls were bare stone without tapestries, the floors plain wood or packed earth rather than polished flagstones. Other servants hurried past on their various errands, and Isolde exchanged nods and brief greetings with those she knew well. Her next duty was to check on the Queen's chambers and ensure everything was in order for the evening. As she climbed the narrow spiral staircase that led to the royal apartments, her thoughts kept returning to Lord Aldrich. There had been something in his eyes during that brief moment of contact, a recognition perhaps, or merely curiosity. She told herself it meant nothing, that a great lord would have no interest in a mere servant, yet the memory of his gaze lingered like the warmth of the sun on her skin. The Queen's chambers were empty when Isolde entered, and she set about her tasks with practiced efficiency. She built up the fire, changed the rushes on the floor, and ensured that fresh water and wine were available. As she worked, she found herself humming an old tune her mother had taught her, a song about star-crossed lovers separated by duty and reunited by fate. The irony was not lost on her, and she smiled ruefully at her own foolishness. She was arranging fresh flowers in a silver vase when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. The door opened, and to her surprise, it was not Queen Margaret who entered, but Lady Beatrice Ashford, one of the Queen's ladies-in-waiting. Lady Beatrice was a woman of perhaps 30 years, attractive in a sharp, calculating way, with pale blonde hair and ice-blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She came from a powerful, noble family and made certain everyone knew it. "Isolde," Lady Beatrice said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Still fussing over the Queen's chambers, I see. Such devotion to duty is truly admirable in someone of your station." Isolde curtsied politely, keeping her expression neutral. "Lady Beatrice, I am simply ensuring that Her Majesty's comfort is attended to, as is my responsibility." Of course," Lady Beatrice said, moving further into the room with the proprietorial air of someone who believed they belonged there more than the actual servant did. "Tell me, did you happen to notice the handsome lord who arrived this morning? Lord Aldrich Blackthorn? Quite striking, is he not?" "I could not say, my lady," Isolde replied carefully. "It is not my place to form opinions about the nobility." Lady Beatrice laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Oh, how very proper of you. But surely even a servant has eyes. He is magnificent. All that dark brooding intensity and those shoulders. They say he killed 20 men single-handedly in the Battle of Dunbar. Can you imagine such strength?" She moved to the window, gazing out over the courtyard with a dreamy expression. He would make a fine husband for someone with the right connections and dowry. Isolde continued her work, refusing to be drawn into the conversation. She had learned long ago that engaging with Lady Beatrice's gossip was a dangerous game. The woman collected information like a magpie collected shiny objects, and she was not above using what she learned to her advantage. "His lands in the north are quite extensive, you know," Lady Beatrice continued, seemingly content to talk whether Isolde responded or not. "And he has no wife, which is unusual for a man of his age and position. He must be at least 30 years old. One wonders why he has not married. Perhaps he is waiting for someone truly exceptional. Perhaps he has been too occupied with defending the realm," Isolde suggested mildly, immediately regretting speaking when Lady Beatrice's sharp gaze fixed on her. "Ah, so you do have opinions about him," Lady Beatrice said with a sly smile. "How interesting, but you are quite right, of course. A man like that would put duty before personal desires. It is a quality to be admired, though it must make for a rather lonely existence." Before Isolde could formulate a response, the door opened again, and this time Queen Margaret did enter, followed by 2 of her other ladies-in-waiting. Lady Beatrice immediately dropped into a deep curtsy, and Isolde did the same. "Your Majesty," Lady Beatrice said, "I was just ensuring that your chambers were properly prepared for your return." "That is Isolde's responsibility, not yours, Beatrice," Queen Margaret said, a hint of steel in her voice. "But your concern is noted. Now, if you would be so kind, I wish to rest for a while before the evening meal. All of you may go, except Isolde." The ladies-in-waiting filed out, Lady Beatrice casting one last curious glance at Isolde before the door closed behind her. Queen Margaret sank into a chair by the fire with a heavy sigh, reaching up to remove her golden circlet. Her carefully arranged hair began to come loose from its pins, and she looked suddenly older and more vulnerable. "Help me out of this gown, Isolde," she said wearily. "I feel as though I am being suffocated by all these layers." Isolde moved to assist, carefully unlacing the crimson gown and helping the Queen into a simpler dress of soft gray wool, more comfortable for private relaxation. Once Queen Margaret was settled, Isolde poured her a goblet of wine and waited silently, knowing from experience that the queen would speak when she was ready. "Did you see him?" Queen Margaret asked finally, staring into the fire. "Lord Aldrich Blackthorn. I saw a nobleman speaking with His Majesty," Isolde replied carefully. "I did not realize his identity at the time. He is a reminder of everything my husband values," the queen said bitterly. "Strength, military prowess, unwavering loyalty to the crown." Edward spent half the morning singing his praises, going on about battles won and enemies defeated. I might as well have been a piece of furniture for all the attention he paid to my presence. Isolde felt a pang of sympathy for the queen. "I am certain His Majesty values your Majesty's contributions to the kingdom, even if he does not express it as he should." Queen Margaret laughed without humor. "You are kind to say so, but we both know the truth. I have failed in my primary duty as queen. I have given him no sons, no heirs to secure the succession. Oh, I bore him a daughter 20 years ago, but she died before her second birthday. Since then, nothing. And now I am too old. He looks at me and sees only his failure, his lack of a legacy." "Your Majesty should not speak so harshly of yourself," Isolde said gently. "You are beloved by the people, and your wisdom in matters of the court is invaluable." "Pretty words," the queen said, but her expression softened slightly. "You truly are your mother's daughter, Isolde." She had the same gift for offering comfort without empty flattery. She took a long drink of wine. "Tell me truthfully, what did you think of Lord Aldrich when you saw him?" Isolde hesitated, unsure how to answer. "He seemed a capable man, your Majesty. A warrior, clearly." "He is more than that," Queen Margaret said. "He is everything a medieval lord should be: strong, honorable, skilled in battle, and unmarried, which has half the noble women in the castle already plotting to catch his eye." She glanced at Isolde with an unreadable expression. "Be careful around him, my dear. Men like that can be dangerous to women like us in ways that have nothing to do with swords." Before Isolde could ask what she meant, there was a sharp knock at the door. "Enter!" Queen Margaret called, her voice suddenly formal again. A young page boy stepped into the room, bowing low. "Your Majesty, His Majesty the King requests the presence of Isolde Whitmore in the Great Hall immediately." Isolde felt her stomach drop. In all her years of service, the king had never summoned her directly. Such a request was highly unusual, and could mean any number of things, none of them good. She looked at Queen Margaret, who appeared equally surprised. "Did His Majesty state the reason for this summons?" the queen asked. "No, your Majesty," the page replied. "Only that she is to come at once." "Very well," Queen Margaret said, though her expression was troubled. "Go, Isolde. Do not keep the king waiting." Isolde curtsied and followed the page from the room, her mind racing with possibilities. Had she done something wrong? Had someone made a complaint about her service? As they walked through the corridors toward the great hall, she tried to calm her racing heart, reminding herself that she had always performed her duties faithfully and had no reason to fear the king's judgment. The great hall had emptied considerably since the morning, with only a handful of nobles and advisors remaining. King Edward stood near the large hearth at one end of the hall, and beside him was Lord Aldrich Blackthorn. The two men were deep in conversation, but they broke off as Isolde approached. She dropped into a deep curtsy, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "Rise, Isolde Whitmore," King Edward commanded. "I have a task for you, one that requires discretion and intelligence." Isolde stood, keeping her gaze respectfully lowered. "I am honored to serve, your Majesty." "Lord Aldrich will be staying at the castle for the foreseeable future," the king continued. "He will need a personal attendant, someone who knows the castle well and can ensure his comfort while he assists me with certain matters of state. Queen Margaret speaks highly of your capabilities, and I have decided you are the right person for this duty." Isolde's mind reeled. To be assigned as a personal attendant to a visiting lord was a significant responsibility, but it also meant leaving the queen's service, at least temporarily. "Your Majesty, I am honored, but my duties to Queen Margaret will be reassigned to one of her other ladies," the king interrupted. "This is not a request, Isolde. It is a command. You will attend to Lord Aldrich's needs and ensure he has everything required for his stay. Is that understood?" "Yes, your Majesty," Isolde replied, knowing there was no point in arguing. For the first time, she allowed herself to look directly at Lord Aldrich. He was watching her with those storm-gray eyes, his expression unreadable. Up close, he was even more imposing than he had seemed from across the hall. He stood easily 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build, evident even beneath his layers of clothing. His face was indeed striking, with high cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened by stubble, and a mouth that looked as though it smiled rarely. A thin scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, a white line against his tanned skin that spoke of old violence. "I appreciate your service, Mistress Whitmore," Lord Aldrich said, his deep voice formal but not unkind. "I assure you I am not a difficult man to please. I require little beyond basic comfort and privacy for my work." "I will do my utmost to meet your needs, my lord," Isolde replied, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "Excellent," King Edward said, clearly considering the matter settled. "Lord Aldrich has been assigned chambers in the East Tower. You may show him there now and ensure everything is in order." Isolde curtsied again. "As your majesty commands." Lord Aldrich followed Isolde from the great hall in silence, his footsteps echoing on the stone floors as they made their way through the castle's labyrinthine corridors. Isolde was acutely aware of his presence behind her, the way he moved with the fluid grace of a predator despite his size, the faint sound of his sword scabbard brushing against his leg with each step. She kept her eyes forward, focusing on the path ahead as she led him toward the East Tower, a section of the castle reserved for visiting nobility of high rank. The East Tower was one of the older parts of Thornwall Castle, its walls thick and solid, built to withstand siege and assault. The chambers there were spacious and well-appointed, though they lacked some of the luxurious touches of the royal apartments. As they climbed the spiral staircase, the temperature dropped noticeably, and Isolde made a mental note to ensure extra firewood was brought up to keep the rooms warm. "You have served Queen Margaret for many years?" Lord Aldrich asked suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice seemed loud in the confined space of the stairwell. 7 years, my lord," Isolde replied, not turning around. "Since my mother passed and I inherited her position." "Your mother was also in the Queen's service?" "Yes, my lord. She was Her Majesty's most trusted lady's maid for nearly 20 years before fever took her." "I am sorry for your loss," Lord Aldrich said, and there was a note of genuine sympathy in his voice that surprised Isolde. "It is difficult to lose a parent, no matter how much time passes." "Thank you, my lord," Isolde said softly. "Have you also experienced such loss?" There was a pause before he answered. "Both my parents died when I was 16. My father fell in battle against Scottish raiders, and my mother succumbed to grief within the year. I inherited my lands and title before I was truly ready for such responsibility." Isolde felt a pang of sympathy for him. To lose both parents so young and be thrust into the demanding role of a lord must have been incredibly difficult. "I am sorry to hear that, my lord. It must have been a heavy burden to bear at such a young age." "It was," he admitted, "but it taught me the importance of duty and the necessity of strength. The North is unforgiving to those who show weakness." They reached the landing at the top of the stairs, and Isolde led him down a corridor lit by torches in iron sconces. The chambers assigned to Lord Aldrich were at the far end, a suite of 3 rooms that included a bedchamber, a sitting room, and a small private study. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, moving to light the candles that stood on various surfaces throughout the rooms. The chambers were indeed well appointed. The bedchamber featured a large 4-poster bed with thick curtains of deep blue wool that could be drawn for warmth and privacy. Furs covered the mattress, and several woolen blankets were folded at the foot of the bed. A large hearth dominated one wall, currently cold but laid with wood ready to be lit. The sitting room contained several chairs cushioned with leather and stuffed with wool, a table suitable for dining or working, and another hearth. The study was smaller but comfortable, with a writing desk, shelves for books or documents, and a window that looked out over the castle's eastern wall toward the moors beyond. "Will these chambers suit your needs, my lord?" Isolde asked, turning to face him properly for the first time since they had left the great hall. Lord Aldrich surveyed the rooms with an appraising eye, and Isolde found herself studying him in turn. In the candlelight, his features were even more striking, the shadows accentuating the strong planes of his face. His dark hair fell past his shoulders in waves that suggested it had recently been freed from a leather tie, and she noticed that his hands, though strong and calloused from sword work, were surprisingly elegant, with long fingers that spoke of both strength and dexterity. They will do well, he said finally. I have stayed in far less comfortable accommodations on campaign. This is quite luxurious by comparison. Isolde moved to the hearth in the bedchamber and began building a fire, arranging the kindling with practiced efficiency. I will ensure that fresh water is brought up daily for washing, and meals can be delivered here if you prefer privacy, or you may dine in the great hall with the other nobles. Which would you prefer, my lord? I will take most of my meals in the hall, Lord Aldrich replied, moving to stand near the window in the sitting room. It would be impolite to isolate myself when the king has been gracious enough to offer his hospitality. However, I often work late into the night on military correspondence and strategic planning. For those occasions, it would be helpful to have something light brought here. Of course, my lord, Isolde said, striking flint to steel and coaxing the kindling into flame. I will make those arrangements. Is there anything else you require immediately? Lord Aldrich turned from the window to look at her, and once again, Isolde felt the impact of his intense gaze. I confess I am curious about something, Mistress Whitmore. You seem quite capable and intelligent, more so than one might expect from someone in service. How did you come to this position? Isolde felt a flash of indignation at the implied condescension, but she kept her voice level. My mother taught me well, my lord. She believed that service was an honorable profession and that those who serve should do so with skill and dignity. I have simply followed her example. I meant no offense, Lord Aldrich said quickly, seeming to realize how his words had sounded. I merely observe that you carry yourself with a confidence and grace that suggests a good education. In the North, such qualities would be valued in any woman, regardless of her station. Things are different at court, Isolde replied, rising from the hearth as the fire began to catch properly. Here, everyone has their place in the hierarchy, and it is best not to step beyond it. I am content with my position, my lord. Serving Queen Margaret has been a privilege, and yet now you have been reassigned to serve me, Lord Aldrich noted. How do you feel about that? The question was so direct and unexpected that Isolde paused in her work, genuinely uncertain how to respond. It was highly unusual for a nobleman to ask a servant's opinion on anything, let alone their feelings about an assignment. She chose her words carefully. It is not my place to have feelings about the king's commands, my lord. I will serve you as faithfully as I have served the queen. That is a very diplomatic answer, Lord Aldrich said with the hint of a smile, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, making him seem younger and far less intimidating. But it tells me nothing of what you actually think. Isolde met his gaze steadily. If you wish for honesty, my lord, I will admit that I am concerned for Queen Margaret. She relies on me, and I worry that my absence will cause her distress. However, I understand that the needs of the kingdom sometimes require sacrifice, and if attending to you serves some greater purpose, then I will do so without complaint. Lord Aldrich nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Queen Margaret is fortunate to have such a loyal servant, and you are right that there is a greater purpose to my presence here. The situation with Scotland grows more dire by the day, and King Edward needs advisors he can trust to help him navigate the coming storm. I am here to provide that counsel and to help coordinate our military response should it become necessary. Then your work is indeed vital, my lord, Isolde said. I will do everything in my power to ensure you can focus on these important matters without distraction. I appreciate that, Lord Aldrich said. He moved to one of the chairs and began unbuckling his sword belt. Tell me, Mistress Whitmore, what do you know of the political situation at court? You must hear things in your position, conversations that others might not realize you are privy to. Isolde hesitated. This was dangerous ground. Sharing information about court politics could be seen as gossip or even betrayal, yet refusing to answer might offend Lord Aldrich or make him suspicious. She decided on a middle path, offering general observations without specifics that could compromise anyone. I know that there are many factions at court, my lord, each with their own interests and alliances. Some nobles favor a more aggressive stance toward Scotland, while others advocate for negotiation. There are also concerns about succession, given that His Majesty has no direct heir. These matters create tension and uncertainty. A tactful summary, Lord Aldrich observed, setting his sword belt aside and settling into the chair. What you do not say is that the court is a nest of vipers, each one waiting for an opportunity to strike. I have spent most of my life avoiding such places, preferring the straightforward nature of battle to the subtle poisoning of court intrigue. Then why did you come when the king summoned you? Isolde asked, then immediately regretted the boldness of the question. Forgive me, my lord, I should not have. No, it is a fair question, Lord Aldrich interrupted. I came because Edward is my king and because the threat from Scotland is real. My lands lie directly in the path of any invasion force that might come south. If we cannot establish a strong defense and perhaps even take the fight to them, my people will suffer. I cannot allow that to happen. There was such conviction in his voice, such genuine concern for those under his protection, that Isolde felt her opinion of him shift. He was not merely a warrior seeking glory or a nobleman playing at politics. He was a man who took his responsibilities seriously and was willing to endure what he clearly found distasteful for the sake of his duty. That is admirable, my lord, she said quietly. Your people are fortunate to have such a dedicated protector. Lord Aldrich's gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. And what of you, Mistress Whitmore? What drives your dedication? You could serve in a lesser position with far less responsibility and live a quieter life. Why do you choose to remain in the Queen's service, subject to all the demands and dangers that entails? Isolde considered the question carefully. No one had ever asked her this before, and she found herself wanting to give him an honest answer. My mother taught me that loyalty is the foundation of honor. Queen Margaret has shown me nothing but kindness since my mother's death. When I was grieving and lost, she took me under her wing and treated me not as a mere servant, but as someone worthy of respect. How could I betray that trust by offering her anything less than my complete devotion? Loyalty is indeed rare in this world, Lord Aldrich said softly. I can see why the king thought you would be suitable for this assignment. He needs people around him who understand the value of such dedication. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Isolde opened it to find two young servants carrying buckets of water and fresh linens. She directed them to place the water by the washing stand and the linens in a chest at the foot of the bed, then dismissed them with quiet thanks. Once they had gone, she turned back to Lord Aldrich. Is there anything else you require this evening, my lord? I should return to Queen Margaret and ensure she understands the situation. Of course, Lord Aldrich said, rising from his chair. I would not keep you from your duties. But Mistress Whitmore, before you go, I want you to know that I understand this arrangement may be difficult for you. I will try to make the transition as smooth as possible. If you need to attend to the Queen for any urgent matters, you need only inform me. Thank you, my lord, Isolde said, genuinely touched by his consideration. That is very kind of you. She curtsied and left the chambers, her mind whirling with conflicting thoughts and emotions. Lord Aldrich was not what she had expected. Beneath the warrior's exterior was a thoughtful, honorable man who seemed to genuinely care about the people around him. It was a dangerous combination, she realized. Dangerous because it would be all too easy to let her guard down around him, to forget the vast gulf in their social positions, and allow herself to develop feelings that could only lead to heartache. As she made her way back through the castle toward the Queen's chambers, Isolde resolved to maintain strict professional boundaries with Lord Aldrich. She would serve him faithfully and efficiently, but she would not allow herself to be drawn into any kind of personal connection. It was the only sensible course of action. When she reached Queen Margaret's chambers, she found the Queen sitting by the fire with a piece of embroidery in her lap, though it was clear she had not made much progress on it. The Queen looked up as Isolde entered, her expression anxious. Tell me everything, Queen Margaret commanded. What did the king want? Why were you summoned? Isolde explained the situation as delicately as she could, watching the Queen's face cycle through surprise, hurt, and finally resignation. When she finished, Queen Margaret set aside her embroidery with a heavy sigh. So Edward takes you from me to give you to his pet warrior, she said bitterly. Of course he does. Nothing I value is safe from his interference. Your Majesty, I am certain the king means no disrespect, Isolde said, though she privately agreed that the reassignment was handled poorly. Lord Aldrich seems like a reasonable man. Perhaps this will not last long, and I can return to your service soon. Perhaps, Queen Margaret said, though she sounded unconvinced. What is he like, this Lord Aldrich? Is he as magnificent as all the simpering noblewomen seem to think? Isolde felt her cheeks warm. He is a capable man who takes his duties seriously, Your Majesty. Beyond that, I could not say. Queen Margaret's eyes narrowed. You are blushing, Isolde. That is most unlike you. Did he say something inappropriate to you? No, Your Majesty, nothing of the sort, Isolde assured her quickly. Lord Aldrich was perfectly respectful. I suppose I am simply unsettled by the change in my circumstances. Be careful around him, Queen Margaret warned, echoing her earlier caution. Men like that, warriors who command respect and loyalty so easily, they can be intoxicating. Before you know it, you find yourself caring more than you should, and then when they inevitably move on to someone more suitable to their station, you are left with a broken heart. I have no intention of developing any feelings for Lord Aldrich beyond professional respect, Isolde said firmly. You need not worry about me, Your Majesty. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity for Isolde. Her days began before dawn, ensuring Lord Aldrich's chambers were warm and comfortable, arranging for his meals, and attending to the countless small details that made his stay at Thornwall Castle as productive as possible. She found herself settling into a rhythm, learning his preferences and habits with the same attentiveness she had once devoted to Queen Margaret. Lord Aldrich, true to his word, proved to be an undemanding guest. He spent most of his days closeted with King Edward and the military advisors, poring over maps and discussing strategy for defending the northern territories against Scottish incursions. In the evenings, he would return to his chambers exhausted, often working late into the night by candlelight on correspondence and battle plans. Isolde would bring him simple meals of bread, cheese, and cold meat, along with wine to warm him against the castle's perpetual chill. Despite her resolution to maintain strict professional boundaries, Isolde found herself looking forward to these evening visits. Lord Aldrich had a way of engaging her in conversation that made her feel valued, asking her opinions on matters she would never have expected a nobleman to discuss with a servant. He spoke to her about the challenges of managing his northern estates, the complexities of maintaining loyalty among his vassals, and his concerns about the growing threat from Scotland. One particularly cold evening, nearly 3 weeks after Lord Aldrich's arrival, Isolde brought him his usual late supper to find him standing at the window of his study, staring out at the darkening moors beyond the castle walls. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters and sending drafts through even the thick stone walls. He turned as she entered, and she was struck by how weary he looked, the lines around his eyes more pronounced than usual. "Mistress Whitmore," he said, managing a tired smile. "You are remarkably punctual. I could set my timepiece by your arrivals if I owned such a device." "Routine provides structure, my lord," Isolde replied, setting the tray down on his desk, "especially in times of uncertainty." Lord Aldrich moved to the desk and sat heavily in his chair, regarding the food without much interest. "Wise words. Tell me, do you ever tire of serving others? Do you not sometimes wish for a life of your own, free from the constant demands of duty?" The question was so unexpected and so personal that Isolde paused in the act of pouring his wine. "I have never known any other life, my lord. My mother raised me to serve, and I have found satisfaction in it. What would I do with freedom if I had it? I have no land, no fortune, no prospects beyond what my position provides." "You could marry," Lord Aldrich suggested, taking the goblet she offered him. "Surely there are men in the castle who would value a woman of your intelligence and capability." Isolde felt her cheeks warm at the mention of marriage. "Marriage requires a dowry I do not possess, my lord, and most men of suitable station are already wed or seek wives who can bring them advancement. I am content with my life as it is." Lord Aldrich studied her over the rim of his goblet, his gray eyes thoughtful. "I find that difficult to believe. You are what, 22? 23? Surely you must have dreams beyond serving others for the rest of your life." 24, my lord," Isolde corrected gently, "and my dreams, such as they are private matters not worthy of your concern." "Humor me," Lord Aldrich pressed. "We are alone here, with no one to judge or criticize. What would you do if you could choose any path in life?" Isolde considered refusing to answer, but something in his expression, a genuine curiosity unmarred by condescension, made her relent. She moved to stand by the fire, staring into the flames as she gathered her thoughts. "If I could choose," she began slowly, "I think I would like to travel, to see the world beyond these castle walls, beyond England even. My mother used to tell me stories of the places she had heard about from merchants and travelers, great cities with buildings that touched the sky, warm lands where the sun always shone, oceans so vast you could sail for months without seeing land. I would like to see if those stories were true." "Those are worthy dreams," Lord Aldrich said softly. "Not the shallow desires for wealth or status that consume so many at court, but genuine curiosity about the world. It speaks well of your character." Isolde turned to face him, emboldened by his interest. "And what of you, my lord? If you could choose any path, what would you do?" Lord Aldrich set down his goblet and leaned back in his chair, a wry smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I would be a simple farmer, I think, working the land with my own hands, watching crops grow, raising animals, living in harmony with the seasons. No battles, no politics, no constant weight of responsibility for hundreds of lives. Just peace and simplicity." "You surprise me, my lord," Isolde said. "I would not have expected such humble aspirations from a great warrior." "War is not glorious, Mistress Whitmore," Lord Aldrich said, his expression darkening. "It is brutal and ugly and leaves scars that never truly heal. I have done terrible things in service to my king and my people, things that haunt my dreams. If I could lay down that burden and live a quiet life, I would do so in a heartbeat. But duty calls, and I cannot ignore it." There was such raw honesty in his words that Isolde felt a surge of compassion for him. She had seen him only as a powerful lord, someone who wielded authority and commanded respect. But now she understood that he carried his own burdens, his own regrets and sorrows. "We are not so different then," she said quietly. "Both of us bound by duty, dreaming of lives we can never have." Lord Aldrich's gaze met hers, and something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of kinship, of shared understanding. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with an awareness that had not been there before. Isolde felt her heart begin to race, and she knew she should look away, should make some excuse and leave. But she found herself rooted to the spot. "Isolde," Lord Aldrich said, using her given name for the first time. His voice was rough, almost uncertain. "I find myself looking forward to these evening conversations more than I should. You have become the brightest part of my days in this place, the one person with whom I can be honest without fear of judgment or political maneuvering." "My lord, Isolde began, but she had no idea how to finish the sentence. Every warning Queen Margaret had given her echoed in her mind, yet she could not deny the truth of his words. She too had come to treasure these moments, the quiet intimacy of their conversations, the way he looked at her as though she mattered. Before either of them could say anything more, there was a sharp knock at the door. Lord Aldrich's expression shifted instantly, the vulnerable man disappearing behind the warrior's mask. "Enter," he called out, his voice formal once more. A page boy stepped into the room, bowing quickly. "Lord Aldrich, the king requests your immediate presence in the council chamber. It is a matter of great urgency." "I will come at once," Lord Aldrich said, rising from his chair. He glanced at Isolde, and she saw regret in his eyes. "Mistress Whitmore, thank you for the meal. We will continue our conversation another time." Isolde curtsied, not trusting her voice, and watched as he strapped on his sword belt and followed the page from the room. Once she was alone, she sank into the chair he had vacated, her hands trembling slightly. What had just happened? Had Lord Aldrich been about to confess feelings for her? And more terrifyingly, had she been ready to admit that she felt the same? This was dangerous territory, far more treacherous than any political intrigue at court. She was a servant, and he was a lord. Even if he genuinely cared for her, there was no future in such an attachment. At best, she might become his mistress, a shameful position that would destroy her reputation and leave her with nothing when he inevitably tired of her. At worst, his interest might be temporary, a diversion during his stay at court, and she would be left nursing a broken heart. Isolde forced herself to stand and gather the remains of the meal onto the tray. She needed to be practical, to remember her place and guard her heart. Whatever was developing between her and Lord Aldrich had to be stopped before it went any further. She would continue to serve him faithfully, but she would maintain her distance, would not allow these intimate evening conversations to continue. As she left his chambers and made her way through the darkened corridors, she tried to convince herself that this was the right decision. But the memory of the warmth in Lord Aldrich's eyes, the vulnerability he had shown her, remained with her like a ghost she could not shake. The next morning, Isolde arrived at Lord Aldrich's chambers earlier than usual, determined to complete her duties quickly and efficiently without lingering for conversation. She found him already awake, standing by the window in the sitting room, dressed in his usual attire of wool and leather. He turned as she entered, and she saw immediately that something had changed. His expression was grave, his jaw tight with tension. "Good morning, my lord," Isolde said, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "I have brought fresh water and will see to the fire." "Mistress Whitmore," Lord Aldrich said, and there was a weight in his voice that made her pause. "I must speak with you about a serious matter." Isolde felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning cold. "Of course, my lord. What troubles you?" Lord Aldrich moved to stand before the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back. "Last night's council meeting brought disturbing news. There has been a theft from the royal treasury. A valuable collection of jewels that belonged to the late princess, King Edward's daughter, has gone missing. The king is furious and has ordered a thorough investigation." "That is indeed troubling, my lord," Isolde said, uncertain why he was telling her this. "I am sure the thief will be found and punished." "I hope you are right," Lord Aldrich said, turning to face her. His expression was troubled. "But there is more. Lady Beatrice Ashford has come forward with a claim that she saw someone near the treasury chamber on the night the jewels disappeared. She has named that person as you." Isolde felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "What? That is impossible. I was nowhere near the treasury. I spent that entire evening attending to Queen Margaret and then retired to my own quarters. Lady Beatrice is lying." "I want to believe you," Lord Aldrich said, and she could hear the conflict in his voice. "But Lady Beatrice is a noble woman, and her testimony carries significant weight. The king has demanded that your quarters be searched, and if the jewels are found, you will be arrested and tried for theft." "This is madness," Isolde said, her mind racing. "Why would Lady Beatrice accuse me of such a crime? I have done nothing to her." "I do not know," Lord Aldrich admitted, "but I have seen enough of court politics to know that accusations are often motivated by jealousy, ambition, or revenge. Have you given Lady Beatrice any reason to wish you harm?" Isolde thought back over her interactions with the noblewoman, the cutting remarks, the barely veiled disdain. Lady Beatrice had always treated her with contempt, but Isolde had never imagined she would go so far as to make false accusations. Unless there was something more at play, some scheme that Isolde could not yet see. "I have done nothing to provoke her," Isolde said firmly, "but I know she resents my close relationship with Queen Margaret. Perhaps she sees this as an opportunity to remove me from the Queen's service and install someone more amenable to her influence." Before Lord Aldrich could respond, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was not a page, but 2 guards in the king's livery, their expressions hard and uncompromising. "Isolde Whitmore," one of them said, "you are to come with us. Your quarters will be searched by order of the king." Isolde felt panic rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I will cooperate fully with the investigation because I have nothing to hide, but I maintain my innocence. I did not steal anything from the treasury." Lord Aldrich stepped forward. "I will accompany you. Mistress Whitmore is currently assigned to my service, and I have a right to ensure she is treated fairly." The guards exchanged glances but nodded. "As you wish, my lord." They made their way through the castle to the servants' quarters, a section of the fortress that nobles rarely visited. Isolde's room was small and simple, containing only a narrow bed, a small chest for her belongings, and a stool. She had few possessions beyond her clothing and a handful of personal items that had belonged to her mother. The guards began their search with ruthless efficiency, emptying the chest, checking beneath the mattress, even examining the walls for loose stones that might conceal a hiding place. Isolde watched with a growing sense of dread, praying that they would find nothing because there was nothing to find. But as one of the guards reached beneath the mattress near the head of the bed, his hand emerged holding a small leather pouch. "What is this?" he demanded, opening the pouch to reveal a cascade of precious gems, rubies, sapphires, and diamonds, that caught the morning light streaming through the small window and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. "No," Isolde breathed, her face draining of color. "Those are not mine. I have never seen them before. Someone must have planted them there to frame me." "A likely story," the guard said coldly. "Isolde Whitmore, you are under arrest for theft from the royal treasury. You will be taken to the dungeons to await trial." Lord Aldrich stepped forward, his hand moving to the hilt of his sword in an instinctive gesture of protection. "Wait, this is far too convenient. The accusation was made only yesterday, and already the stolen items are found exactly where they would need to be to confirm the charges. Any fool can see this is a setup." The guard's expression hardened. "With respect, my lord, that is not for you to determine. The evidence speaks for itself. The jewels were found in her possession, and Lady Beatrice has testified to seeing her near the treasury. The king will decide her guilt or innocence at trial. I demand to speak with King Edward, Lord Aldrich said, his voice taking on a commanding tone that made even the guards hesitate. I am his trusted advisor, and I have the right to present my observations about this case directly to him. The king is aware of the arrest, the second guard said. He ordered us to proceed immediately. You may present your concerns at the trial, my lord, but for now, we must follow our orders. Isolde felt strong hands grasp her arms, pulling them behind her back. The cold bite of iron shackles closed around her wrists, and the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She was being arrested for a crime she did not commit, and there seemed to be nothing she could do to stop it. Her eyes met Lord Aldrich's, and she saw fury and helplessness warring in his expression. I did not do this, she said to him, needing him to believe her even if no one else did. I swear to you on my mother's memory, I am innocent. I know, Lord Aldrich said, and the certainty in his voice gave her a small measure of comfort. I will not let this injustice stand. I will find the truth and prove your innocence. The guards began to lead her away, and Isolde forced herself to walk with her head held high, refusing to show the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. As they moved through the castle corridors toward the dungeons, she became aware of the stares and whispers of other servants and courtiers. News of her arrest had already spread, as it always did in the closed world of the castle. She saw shock on some faces, satisfaction on others, and worst of all, disappointment and betrayal in the eyes of those who had considered her a friend. The dungeons of Thornwall Castle were located deep beneath the main keep, accessible only through a series of descending staircases that seemed to spiral down into the very bowels of the earth. The temperature dropped with each step, and the air grew thick with dampness and the smell of mold and human misery. Torches provided the only light, casting grotesque shadows on the rough stone walls. The cell they placed her in was small and bare, with only a pile of filthy straw in one corner and a bucket in another. The iron door clanged shut with a finality that made Isolde's stomach clench with fear. The guards departed without a word, their footsteps echoing away until she was left in near total darkness, with only the faint glow of a distant torch providing any illumination. Isolde sank down onto the straw, her shackled hands making it difficult to find a comfortable position. The cold from the stone floor seeped through her dress, and she began to shiver uncontrollably. She tried to think rationally, to analyze the situation and determine who might have orchestrated this elaborate frame. Lady Beatrice was the obvious suspect, but would she have acted alone? Who else might benefit from Isolde's removal from court? As she sat in the darkness, Isolde heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up to see a figure materialize from the shadows, and her heart leapt with hope when she recognized Queen Margaret, wrapped in a heavy cloak with the hood drawn up to conceal her identity. Behind her stood a guard who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the situation. "Your Majesty," Isolde said, struggling to her feet despite the shackles, "you should not be down here. If the king discovers—" "Let me worry about my husband," Queen Margaret interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. She turned to the guard. "Open this cell. I wish to speak with the prisoner privately." "Your Majesty, I cannot allow you to enter the cell," the guard protested. "It would not be safe." "Do you truly believe this young woman poses any threat to me?" Queen Margaret demanded. "She has served me faithfully for 7 years. I will speak with her, or I will ensure the king hears of your insubordination. Which would you prefer?" The guard hesitated, then reluctantly unlocked the cell door. Queen Margaret swept inside, and the guard closed the door behind her but did not lock it, standing close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to give them some privacy. Queen Margaret pulled back her hood and reached out to cup Isolde's face in her hands. In the dim torchlight, Isolde could see tears glistening in the queen's eyes. "My dear girl, what have they done to you? I could not believe it when I heard of your arrest. You a thief? It is the most absurd accusation I have ever heard." "I did not do this, Your Majesty," Isolde said, her own eyes filling with tears at the queen's obvious faith in her innocence. "Someone planted those jewels in my quarters. Lady Beatrice is lying about seeing me near the treasury." "I know," Queen Margaret said fiercely. "I know you are innocent, and I will not rest until we prove it. But Isolde, you must understand the danger you are in. Theft from the royal treasury is a capital offense. If you are found guilty at trial, the punishment is death or banishment. Edward is furious about the theft of his daughter's jewels. Those gems were all he had left of her, and he will demand harsh justice." Isolde felt her legs weaken, and she would have collapsed if not for the queen's steadying hands. Death or banishment. The words echoed in her mind with terrible finality. She had known the charges were serious, but hearing the potential consequences spoken aloud made them horrifyingly real. "What can I do?" Isolde whispered. "How can I prove my innocence when the evidence has been manufactured against me?" "Lord Aldrich is already working on that," Queen Margaret said. "He came to me after your arrest, demanding to know everything I knew about the situation. He is convinced that this is a conspiracy, and he has vowed to uncover the truth. The man is quite formidable when he sets his mind to something." Despite the dire circumstances, Isolde felt a warmth bloom in her chest at the thought of Lord Aldrich fighting for her. "He barely knows me, Your Majesty. Why would he risk his standing with the king to defend a servant?" Queen Margaret's expression softened, and she gave Isolde a knowing look. "I think we both know the answer to that question, my dear. The way he looks at you, the concern in his voice when he speaks of you, it is clear that Lord Aldrich has developed feelings for you, and unless I am very much mistaken, you feel the same way about him." Isolde opened her mouth to deny it, but the words would not come. What was the point of denying the truth when she might be facing death or exile? "It does not matter what either of us feels," she said instead. "Even if I am somehow proven innocent, there is no future for us. He is a great lord, and I am no one. Love does not concern itself with social stations," Queen Margaret said gently. "I learned that lesson too late in my own life. I married for duty and political advantage, and I have spent 20 years in a cold, loveless union. Do not make the same mistake I did. If you survive this ordeal, do not let fear or propriety prevent you from reaching for happiness." Before Isolde could respond, they heard footsteps approaching rapidly. The guard straightened, his hand moving to his sword. A moment later, Lord Aldrich appeared. His face flushed as though he had been running. He stopped short when he saw Queen Margaret in the cell, then quickly bowed. "Your Majesty, I did not expect to find you here. I came to offer what comfort I could to a faithful servant who has been wronged," Queen Margaret said, stepping out of the cell. "Have you made any progress in your investigation?" Lord Aldrich's expression was grim. "Some. I have been questioning the other servants and guards, trying to establish Isolde's movements on the night of the theft. Several people have confirmed that she was with you that evening, Your Majesty, attending to your needs until quite late." "That is true," Queen Margaret confirmed. "She did not leave my chambers until well after midnight, and the treasury theft is believed to have occurred around the 10th hour of the evening. She could not have been in 2 places at once." "Exactly," Lord Aldrich said, "which means Lady Beatrice's testimony is false. But when I attempted to question her about the discrepancy, she became evasive and then claimed she must have been mistaken about the exact time she saw Isolde. She now says it might have been earlier in the evening, before Isolde went to attend the Queen." "How convenient," Queen Margaret said acidly. "The woman is clearly lying, but we need proof." "Her word as a noblewoman carries more weight than the testimony of servants, no matter how many of them confirm Isolde's alibi." "I am aware of that," Lord Aldrich said, "which is why I have been pursuing another line of investigation. I went to examine the treasury chamber myself, looking for any clues the guards might have missed. The lock on the door shows no signs of being forced, which means whoever stole the jewels either had a key or was let in by someone who did." "Who has access to the treasury keys?" Isolde asked from within the cell, her mind beginning to work through the puzzle despite her fear. "The king, of course," Lord Aldrich said. "The royal treasurer, Sir Edmund Carlisle, and the captain of the guard. I have spoken with all 3. The king's key never leaves his person. Sir Edmund keeps his key in a locked box in his chambers, and he swears it has not been disturbed. The captain of the guard maintains that his key is accounted for." "Then someone must have made a copy," Queen Margaret said, "or stolen one temporarily and returned it after the theft." "That is my belief as well," Lord Aldrich agreed, "but proving it will be difficult. I have also been trying to understand the motive. Why these particular jewels? They are valuable, certainly, but there are other items in the treasury worth far more. Why target the late princess's collection specifically?" Isolde had been thinking about this very question during her hours in the cell. "The jewels belonged to the king's daughter," she said slowly. "Their theft would enrage him more than any other. Someone wanted to provoke his fury, to ensure he would demand swift and harsh justice. This was never just about stealing valuable items. It was about creating a situation where an innocent person could be framed and destroyed. Lord Aldrich's eyes met hers through the bars of the cell, and she saw admiration in his gaze. "You are absolutely right. This was always about framing you, which means we need to understand why. Who benefits from your removal from court?" "Lady Beatrice," Queen Margaret said immediately. "She has always resented Isolde's influence with me. With Isolde gone, she would position herself as my primary attendant and gain access to all my private conversations and correspondence." "There may be more to it than that," Lord Aldrich said. "I have been making discreet inquiries about Lady Beatrice's circumstances. Her family's fortunes have declined significantly in recent years. They need an advantageous marriage to restore their wealth and position, and Lady Beatrice is already 30 years old, past the age when most noble women wed. She is growing desperate." "What does that have to do with framing me?" Isolde asked. Lord Aldrich hesitated, then said carefully, "I believe Lady Beatrice may have set her sights on me as a potential husband. My lands are wealthy, and I have no wife. Since my arrival at court, she has made several attempts to engage my interest, all of which I rebuffed. But she may have noticed that I have been spending considerable time with you, Isolde. If she perceived you as a rival for my affections, even though such a match would be impossible given our different stations, she might have decided to eliminate the competition." Isolde felt her face grow hot with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "So I am to be executed or banished because a noblewoman is jealous. That is monstrous." "It is the way of courts," Queen Margaret said bitterly. "People are destroyed every day for the pettiest of reasons. But we will not allow it to happen to you, Isolde. We will find proof of Lady Beatrice's scheme and present it to the king. The trial is scheduled for 3 days hence." Lord Aldrich said, "We have very little time to gather evidence. Your Majesty, I will need your help. You move in circles I cannot access as easily. Perhaps you could make subtle inquiries among the other noblewomen. See if anyone has noticed anything suspicious about Lady Beatrice's behavior." "I will do more than that," Queen Margaret said. "I will speak directly to Edward. He may not love me, but he respects my judgment. If I tell him I believe Isolde is innocent, he will at least consider the possibility." "Every bit helps," Lord Aldrich said. He turned his attention back to Isolde. "You must be strong. I know these conditions are terrible, but you must endure them a little longer. I swear to you, I will not rest until you are free." "I believe you," Isolde said softly. "Thank you, my lord, for everything." Lord Aldrich reached through the bars and took her shackled hands in his, heedless of the guard watching nearby. "When this is over," he said quietly, "we will have a conversation that has been postponed too long. There are things I need to say to you, things I should have said before all this happened." Isolde felt tears prick her eyes. "My lord, even if I am freed, nothing can change what we are." "You are a nobleman, and I are the most remarkable woman I have ever met," Lord Aldrich interrupted. "And I do not give a damn about social conventions. Let me worry about the consequences. You just focus on staying strong." Queen Margaret cleared her throat gently. "We should go before our presence here is noticed and reported to the king. Isolde, have faith. We will prove your innocence." The 3 days that followed were the longest of Isolde's life. The dungeon was a place of unrelenting misery, where time seemed to stretch and distort in the darkness. She tried to keep track of the hours by listening for the changing of the guards, the distant bells that marked the canonical hours, but eventually everything blurred together into an endless cycle of cold, hunger, and fear. The guards brought her meager meals of stale bread and watery gruel twice a day, and she forced herself to eat despite her lack of appetite, knowing she would need her strength for the trial. During those dark hours, Isolde's mind wandered through memories of her life at Thornwall Castle. She thought of her mother, remembering the lessons she had taught about dignity, honor, and the importance of maintaining one's integrity even in the face of injustice. She thought of Queen Margaret and the kindness the Queen had shown her over the years, and despite her best efforts not to, she thought constantly of Lord Aldrich, replaying their conversations, the warmth in his eyes, the way his hand had felt holding hers through the prison bars. On the morning of the trial, guards came to escort her from the dungeon. They removed her shackles long enough for her to wash her face and hands in a bucket of cold water, then replaced them before leading her up through the castle. Isolde blinked against the daylight streaming through the windows, her eyes having grown accustomed to the perpetual gloom of the dungeons. She was painfully aware of how she must look, her dress stained and wrinkled, her hair disheveled, her face pale from lack of sunlight and proper food. But she held her head high, determined to face her accusers with whatever dignity she could muster. The trial was to be held in the Great Hall, transformed now into a makeshift courtroom. The furniture had been rearranged, with King Edward's throne positioned on the raised dais to serve as the judge's seat. Benches had been brought in for the nobles and courtiers who would observe the proceedings, and the hall was packed with spectators, all eager to witness the downfall of the servant who had dared to steal from the crown. As Isolde was led to a small wooden platform in the center of the hall where the accused traditionally stood, she scanned the crowd for friendly faces. She found Queen Margaret sitting among the noble ladies, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes radiating support and encouragement. Lord Aldrich stood with the other military advisors near the king's throne, his face a mask of controlled fury. And there, seated prominently among the noble women, was Lady Beatrice Ashford, looking serene and confident in a gown of pale blue silk, embroidered with silver thread. King Edward entered the hall with great ceremony, and everyone rose and bowed as he made his way to his throne. He looked every inch the stern monarch, his face set in harsh lines, his dark eyes cold and unforgiving. When he was seated, he gestured for the assembly to sit, and the hall fell silent, waiting for the proceedings to begin. "We are gathered here to try the case of Isolde Whitmore, accused of theft from the royal treasury," King Edward announced, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "The charges are grave, and the evidence will be presented fairly. Let it be known that I will tolerate no prejudice in this matter. Justice will be served, whether the accused is guilty or innocent." The royal treasurer, Sir Edmund Carlisle, was called first to testify. He was a thin, nervous man in his 50s, with wispy gray hair and ink-stained fingers that spoke of his profession. He confirmed that the jewels belonging to the late princess had been discovered missing during a routine inventory 3 weeks prior, and that their value was considerable, both monetarily and sentimentally. "These gems were the only tangible legacy of my daughter," King Edward said, his voice roughening with emotion. "They were to be preserved as a royal treasure, a remembrance of the child I lost. Their theft is not merely a crime against the crown, but a desecration of her memory." Next, Lady Beatrice was called to give her testimony. She rose gracefully and moved to stand before the king, curtsying deeply. In the morning light streaming through the tall windows, she looked beautiful and dignified, the perfect image of noble virtue. When she spoke, her voice was clear and confident. "Your Majesty, on the night in question, I was returning to my chambers after attending to a small matter in the chapel. As I passed near the corridor that leads to the treasury, I saw Isolde Whitmore moving furtively in that direction. She appeared agitated and kept looking over her shoulder as though afraid of being observed. When she noticed me, she seemed startled and quickly claimed she was on an errand for the Queen. But her manner was suspicious, and I thought it my duty to report what I had seen." "What time was this?" King Edward asked. Lady Beatrice hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then said, "I cannot be entirely certain of the exact hour, Your Majesty. It was evening, perhaps around the 8th or 9th hour. The light was fading, but there was still enough to see clearly." "And you are certain it was Isolde Whitmore you saw?" "Absolutely certain, Your Majesty. I have known her for years." "There is no possibility of mistaken identity." Isolde wanted to shout that it was a lie, that she had been nowhere near the treasury that evening, but she knew interrupting would only make her appear guilty and disrespectful. She clenched her shackled hands into fists and forced herself to remain silent. The captain of the guard testified next, describing how the jewels had been found hidden in Isolde's quarters, concealed beneath her mattress. He presented the leather pouch containing the gems as evidence, and there was a collective gasp from the assembled courtiers when the precious stones were displayed, catching the light and throwing colored reflections across the walls. "These jewels were exactly where Lady Beatrice's information suggested they might be," the captain said. "In my professional opinion, the evidence is clear and convincing." Finally, it was time for Isolde to speak in her own defense. The guards led her forward to stand directly before the king's throne. She looked up at Edward and saw no mercy in his face, only the cold determination of a man seeking vengeance for a personal wrong. "Isolde Whitmore," King Edward said, "you have heard the testimony against you. How do you answer these charges?" Isolde took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Your Majesty, I am innocent of these charges. I did not steal the jewels, and I was nowhere near the treasury on the night in question. Lady Beatrice is lying about seeing me there." I spent that entire evening attending to Queen Margaret, and I can provide witnesses who will confirm my whereabouts. And yet the jewels were found in your possession, King Edward said. How do you explain that? They were planted there, Your Majesty, Isolde said firmly. Someone who wishes me harm placed those jewels in my quarters to frame me for this crime. I have never seen them before the guards discovered them during their search. That is a serious accusation, King Edward said. You claim that Lady Beatrice, a noblewoman of good standing, has conspired to destroy you through false testimony and manufactured evidence. Why would she do such a thing? Before Isolde could answer, Lord Aldrich stepped forward from his position near the throne. Your Majesty, if I may address the court? King Edward's eyes narrowed. Lord Aldrich, this is most irregular. You are not a party to these proceedings. Nevertheless, I have information that is relevant to the case, Lord Aldrich said. Information that calls into question the credibility of Lady Beatrice's testimony and suggests an alternative explanation for the evidence. There was a murmur of surprise from the assembled nobles. King Edward looked annoyed but gestured for Lord Aldrich to continue. Very well. Speak. Lord Aldrich moved to stand beside Isolde, a gesture of solidarity that did not go unnoticed by the crowd. Your Majesty, I have spent the past 3 days investigating this matter thoroughly. I have questioned numerous servants and guards, and I have established beyond any doubt that Isolde Whitmore was attending to Queen Margaret on the evening of the theft, from the 7th hour until well past midnight. Multiple witnesses can confirm this, including the Queen herself. Queen Margaret rose from her seat among the ladies. It is true, Your Majesty. Isolde was with me the entire evening. She helped me dress for a private dinner, attended me during the meal, and then assisted me in preparing for bed. She could not possibly have been near the treasury when the theft occurred. King Edward's expression darkened. If what you say is true, then Lady Beatrice's testimony is false. But that does not explain how the jewels came to be in the accused's possession. I believe I can explain that as well, Your Majesty, Lord Aldrich said. With your permission, I would like to call a witness who can shed light on this mystery. King Edward nodded curtly. Proceed. Lord Aldrich gestured to someone in the crowd, and a young servant girl stepped forward nervously. She was perhaps 16 years old, with mousy brown hair and frightened eyes. She curtsied awkwardly before the king. Your Majesty, this is Margaret Fletcher, a chambermaid who serves in the east wing of the castle, Lord Aldrich said. Margaret, please tell the court what you told me yesterday. The girl's voice shook as she spoke. Your Majesty, 3 days before Mistress Isolde was arrested, I saw Lady Beatrice entering the servants' quarters late at night. I thought it strange because nobles never venture into that part of the castle. I hid in a doorway and watched as she went into Mistress Isolde's room. She was carrying something, a small pouch or bag. She remained inside for only a moment, then left quickly, looking around to make sure no one had seen her. The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Lady Beatrice rose from her seat, her face flushed with anger. This is preposterous. The girl is lying, probably paid to do so by someone who wishes to discredit me. That is a serious accusation, Lady Beatrice, King Edward said. Do you have any proof that this witness has been bribed? I need no proof beyond common sense, Your Majesty, Lady Beatrice said. Why would I plant evidence against a mere servant? What possible motive could I have? Lord Aldrich's voice cut through the hall like a blade. Because you perceived Isolde as a rival for my affections, and in your desperation to secure a wealthy marriage, you decided to eliminate her through false accusations. Lady Beatrice's face went from flushed to pale in an instant. That is absurd. I have no interest in you, Lord Aldrich, and even if I did, a servant would hardly be a rival. Then why have you made numerous attempts to engage my attention since my arrival at court? Lord Aldrich demanded. Why have you contrived to be present whenever I attend court functions? And why did you become noticeably hostile toward Isolde after you observed us conversing in the corridors? This is all circumstantial speculation, Lady Beatrice protested, but her voice had lost its confidence. You have no real proof of any conspiracy. Actually, I do, Lord Aldrich said. He reached into his tunic and withdrew a small brass key. This key was found in your chambers during a search conducted this morning. It is a copy of the treasury key, commissioned from a blacksmith in the village 3 months ago. The blacksmith has confirmed that you paid him handsomely to make it and to keep silent about the transaction. The hall fell into shocked silence. All eyes turned to Lady Beatrice, whose face had gone gray with fear. King Edward's expression was thunderous as he leaned forward on his throne. Is this true? He demanded. Did you steal the jewels and then frame an innocent woman to cover your crime? Lady Beatrice opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and Isolde could see the panic in her eyes as she realized she had been caught. Finally, she seemed to make a decision. Her shoulders sagged, and when she spoke, her voice was bitter and defeated. Yes, she admitted. Yes, I did it. I stole the jewels and I planted them in Isolde's quarters. But you must understand, Your Majesty, I was desperate. My family has fallen on hard times, and I needed money to restore our fortunes. The jewels were valuable, and I thought I could sell them discreetly. But then Lord Aldrich arrived, and I saw an opportunity for something even better than money, a wealthy husband who could save my family from ruin. And when Lord Aldrich showed interest in Isolde instead of you decided to destroy her, Queen Margaret said, her voice filled with contempt. You would have sent an innocent woman to her death out of petty jealousy and greed. She is just a servant, Lady Beatrice cried, her composure completely shattered now. What does it matter what happens to her? She has no family, no position, no value beyond the menial tasks she performs. Why should someone like her stand in the way of my future? The callousness of her words sent a ripple of shock through the assembled nobles. Even those who might have been sympathetic to her circumstances were appalled by her utter lack of remorse or humanity. King Edward rose from his throne, his face dark with fury. You dare to justify attempted murder with arguments about social station? He thundered. You steal from the royal treasury, desecrate my daughter's memory, and then seek to destroy an innocent woman to cover your crimes, and you think your noble birth excuses these actions? Lady Beatrice fell to her knees, suddenly understanding the gravity of her situation. Your Majesty, please, I beg for mercy. I made a terrible mistake. But surely my family's service to the crown counts for something. Your family's service is the only reason I do not have you executed where you stand. King Edward interrupted coldly. Guards, take Lady Beatrice Ashford into custody. She is to be banished from England immediately. She will be escorted to the coast and placed on a ship bound for the continent with nothing but the clothes on her back. If she ever sets foot in this kingdom again, she will be arrested and hanged. This is my final judgment. As the guards moved to seize Lady Beatrice, she cast one last venomous look at Isolde, then at Lord Aldrich. This is not over, she hissed. You will regret this humiliation. The guards dragged Lady Beatrice from the hall, her protests and pleas fading as she disappeared through the doorway. King Edward turned his attention to Isolde, who still stood on the platform, hardly daring to believe that the nightmare was truly over. The shackles on her wrists suddenly felt impossibly heavy, a reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. Isolde Whitmore, King Edward said, his voice considerably softer than it had been moments before. You have been gravely wronged by this court and by those who sought to destroy you. I offer you my sincere apologies for the injustice you have suffered and for doubting your integrity. You are hereby cleared of all charges and restored to your position with full honor. He gestured to the guards, who quickly moved forward to remove the shackles from Isolde's wrists. The iron fell away, and she rubbed her chafed skin, feeling tears of relief prick her eyes. She sank into a deep curtsy before the king. Thank you, Your Majesty, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I am grateful for your justice and for the mercy you have shown in seeking the truth. The credit belongs to Lord Aldrich and to my wife, King Edward said, glancing at Queen Margaret. They refused to accept the convenient narrative and insisted on a thorough investigation. It is a reminder that true justice requires diligence and an open mind, qualities I confess I did not display in my initial judgment of this matter. Queen Margaret rose from her seat and moved swiftly across the hall to embrace Isolde, propriety forgotten in the moment of triumph. My dear girl, she whispered, I knew you were innocent. I never doubted you for a moment. Isolde clung to the queen, allowing herself a brief moment of weakness as the fear and stress of the past days finally caught up with her. Thank you, Your Majesty. If not for you and Lord Aldrich, I would have been condemned. Lord Aldrich approached them, and Queen Margaret released Isolde, stepping back with a knowing smile. I believe Lord Aldrich has much to discuss with you, she said, and I think you both deserve some privacy after this ordeal. Your Majesty, she addressed her husband, if the trial is concluded, I will escort Isolde to my chambers so she may rest and recover. King Edward nodded. Of course, but before you go, I wish to make an announcement. He raised his voice so the entire hall could hear. Let it be known that Isolde Whitmore has proven herself to be a woman of exceptional character and integrity. She has endured false accusation with dignity and has shown remarkable strength in the face of injustice. Furthermore, I wish to express my gratitude to Lord Aldrich Blackthorn, whose dedication to uncovering the truth has prevented a terrible miscarriage of justice. You both have my respect and my thanks." The assembled nobles applauded, though Isolde noticed that some did so more enthusiastically than others. There would always be those at court who resented a servant receiving royal recognition, but in that moment, she did not care. She was free, her name was cleared, and she had survived an ordeal that could have easily destroyed her. As the crowd began to disperse, Lord Aldrich offered Isolde his arm. "May I escort you to your quarters?" he asked, formally, though his eyes held a warmth that contradicted the proper tone of his words. "I would be grateful, my lord," Isolde replied, placing her hand on his arm. They left the great hall together, with Queen Margaret walking a few steps ahead to give them some semblance of privacy while still maintaining propriety. The corridors of the castle seemed brighter somehow, the gray stone walls less oppressive now that the shadow of the false accusation had been lifted. As they walked, Isolde became aware of the stares and whispers of the servants and courtiers they passed, but she held her head high, refusing to show any shame for circumstances beyond her control. When they reached Queen Margaret's chambers, the queen turned to them with a gentle smile. "Isolde, you must rest and recover your strength. I will have a bath prepared for you and fresh clothing brought. Lord Aldrich, thank you for your service to justice and to this household." Lord Aldrich bowed. "Your Majesty, I wonder if I might have a private word with Mistress Isolde before she retires. There are matters we discussed before her arrest that remain unresolved." Queen Margaret's smile widened. "Of course. I will be in my sitting room should I be needed. Take all the time you require." She entered her chambers, leaving Isolde and Lord Aldrich standing in the corridor. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Isolde found herself suddenly nervous, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the smell of the dungeons that surely clung to her clothing. Lord Aldrich seemed equally uncertain, his usual confidence replaced by an almost boyish hesitation. "I owe you my life," Isolde said finally, breaking the silence. "If you had not investigated so thoroughly, if you had not fought for me, I would be on my way to the gallows or to exile. I do not have adequate words to express my gratitude." "You owe me nothing," Lord Aldrich said firmly. "I could not stand by and watch an innocent woman be destroyed by lies and conspiracy. But beyond that, Isolde, I had personal reasons for fighting so hard to prove your innocence. Reasons I should have made clear before any of this happened." He took her hands in his, and Isolde felt her heart begin to race. They were standing in a public corridor where anyone might see them, but Lord Aldrich seemed not to care about the impropriety of his actions. "During these past weeks," he continued, his voice low and intense, "you have become more important to me than I ever thought possible. At first, I told myself it was merely appreciation for your intelligence and capability, admiration for your dedication and integrity, but I was lying to myself. The truth is, I have fallen in love with you, Isolde Whitmore, completely and irrevocably in love." Isolde felt tears spring to her eyes, but these were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "My lord, I feel the same way. I tried to deny it, tried to remind myself of all the reasons why such feelings were impossible and inappropriate, but my heart would not listen. I love you, Aldrich. I have loved you almost from the moment we met." Lord Aldrich lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. "Then we must find a way to be together. I know the obstacles are considerable. You are right that society will condemn a match between a lord and a servant, but I have lands in the north, far from court and its rigid conventions. We could marry and live there, away from the judgment and interference of those who would seek to keep us apart." "Marry?" Isolde breathed, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would marry me? But your position, your reputation, mean nothing compared to my happiness." Lord Aldrich interrupted. "I have spent my entire adult life doing my duty, fighting wars, managing estates, playing the role expected of me. For once, I want to choose something for myself. I want to choose you, Isolde. Will you marry me?" Isolde felt as though her heart might burst with joy, but reason intruded even in this perfect moment. The king would never approve such a marriage. He has already shown favor to you, but asking for permission to wed a servant might be too much. You could lose his support, his trust. "Then we will not ask for permission," Lord Aldrich said with a reckless grin that transformed his usually serious face. "We will marry in secret with Queen Margaret as our witness if she is willing. Once it is done, the king may be angry, but he cannot undo it. And in time, when he sees that we are happy and that I remain as loyal and effective in his service as I have always been, he will accept it." Before Isolde could respond, the door to the Queen's chambers opened, and Queen Margaret stepped out, looking far too pleased with herself. "Forgive me for eavesdropping," she said without a trace of apology, "but these stone walls are not as soundproof as one might wish." "Lord Aldrich, you are proposing a secret marriage, and you wish for me to serve as witness?" Lord Aldrich had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Your Majesty, I know it is an unconventional request." "It is a wonderful request," Queen Margaret interrupted, "and I would be honored to stand witness to a union based on genuine love, rather than political expedience. Isolde deserves happiness after all she has endured, and you, Lord Aldrich, deserve the same. I will help you arrange everything." "Your Majesty, are you certain?" Isolde asked. "If the king discovers your involvement, he might be furious with you as well." Queen Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "Edward and I have been married for 20 years without love or true companionship. If I can help two people who genuinely care for each other find happiness, I will do so gladly, regardless of the consequences. Besides," she added with a sly smile, "it will be rather satisfying to facilitate something that the rigid conventions of court would normally forbid." Over the next week, plans were made in careful secrecy. Queen Margaret used her connections to arrange for a discreet priest, Father Benedict, who served a small chapel in the village beyond the castle walls. He was an elderly man known for his compassion and his willingness to bend rules in service of what he considered a greater good. When the Queen explained the situation to him, he agreed immediately to perform the ceremony. The wedding was scheduled for a moonless night, when the castle would be quiet and the guards less vigilant. Isolde spent the intervening days in a state of nervous excitement, barely able to believe that this was truly happening. She continued her duties attending to Queen Margaret, who had insisted that Isolde be formally restored to her service rather than remaining assigned to Lord Aldrich, both to maintain propriety and to give them a reason to interact without arousing suspicion. Lord Aldrich, meanwhile, conducted himself with perfect formality in public, treating Isolde with the distant courtesy appropriate to their supposed stations. But in private moments, stolen conversations in quiet corners of the castle or brief encounters in the corridors, he would look at her with such warmth and love that Isolde felt as though she were glowing from within. On the night chosen for the wedding, Isolde dressed with trembling hands in a gown Queen Margaret had given her, a beautiful creation of deep emerald wool with silver embroidery at the sleeves and neckline. It was finer than anything Isolde had ever worn, and when she looked at her reflection in the polished silver mirror, she hardly recognized herself. Her auburn hair had been arranged in an elaborate style with small white flowers woven through it, and her face was flushed with excitement and nervousness. "You look beautiful," Queen Margaret said softly, standing behind her. "I wish I could give you a grander wedding, with all the ceremony and celebration you deserve. But perhaps there is something special about this intimate gathering, something more genuine than all the pomp that usually accompanies noble marriages." "I need no grand ceremony," Isolde said, turning to embrace the Queen. "All I need is to marry the man I love, and to have you there as my witness. That is more than I ever dreamed possible." They slipped out of the castle through a servant's entrance, wrapped in dark cloaks to conceal their identities. Lord Aldrich was waiting for them in the shadows, similarly disguised, along with two of his most trusted men-at-arms, who would serve as additional witnesses and guards. Together, they made their way through the quiet village to the small chapel where Father Benedict waited. The chapel was tiny, barely large enough to hold a dozen people, with simple wooden benches and a modest altar. Candles provided the only light, casting a warm glow over the rough stone walls. Father Benedict greeted them with a kindly smile, his lined face radiating gentle approval. "Come, my children," he said. "Let us begin this sacred union." Lord Aldrich removed his cloak and stood before the altar in his finest clothing, a tunic of deep blue wool embroidered with silver thread, leather breeches, and tall boots. He looked every inch the noble lord, powerful and commanding, yet when his eyes met Isolde's, they held only tenderness and love. Isolde moved to stand beside him, her hand trembling as he took it in his. Father Benedict opened his prayer book and began the ceremony, speaking the ancient words that would bind them together as husband and wife. Isolde tried to focus on the prayers, to absorb every moment of this incredible experience, but her awareness narrowed to the feeling of Aldrich's hand holding hers, the sound of his voice as he spoke his vows, the look in his eyes that promised a future filled with love and partnership. Do you, Aldrich Blackthorn, take this woman, Isolde Whitmore, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Aldrich said firmly, his voice strong and certain. And do you, Isolde Whitmore, take this man, Aldrich Blackthorn, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Isolde whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Father Benedict smiled. Then by the power vested in me by the Church and in the sight of God and these witnesses, I pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Aldrich drew Isolde close and kissed her gently, a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Isolde felt tears of joy streaming down her face as she returned the embrace, hardly able to believe that this remarkable man was now her husband. When they finally broke apart, Queen Margaret was dabbing at her own eyes with a handkerchief, smiling through her tears. Congratulations to you both, she said warmly. May your marriage be blessed with all the love and happiness that mine has lacked. Father Benedict produced a simple parchment documenting the marriage, and they all signed it as witnesses. Aldrich carefully folded the document and tucked it into his tunic, the only proof of their union that they would carry back to the castle. The return journey was made in silence, each of them absorbed in their own thoughts about what had just transpired and what challenges might lie ahead. They re-entered the castle without incident, the guards at the servants' entrance too bored and cold to pay much attention to the cloaked figures passing through. Queen Margaret bid them good night with a meaningful look, returning to her chambers while Aldrich and Isolde made their way to the East Tower. They had agreed that Isolde would spend the night in Aldrich's chambers, the first of many nights they would share as husband and wife, though they would need to be extraordinarily discreet to avoid discovery. Once safely inside Aldrich's rooms with the door secured behind them, they finally allowed themselves to relax. Aldrich built up the fire while Isolde removed her cloak, suddenly feeling shy despite everything they had just shared. This was her wedding night, a milestone she had never truly expected to experience, and the reality of it was both thrilling and terrifying. Aldrich seemed to sense her nervousness. He came to stand before her, taking both her hands in his and looking at her with such love that her fears began to melt away. We have all the time in the world, he said softly. There is no need to rush anything. Tonight, I simply want to hold you, to know that you are truly mine and I am yours. Isolde felt a wave of relief and love wash over her. I never thought I could be this happy, she whispered. After everything that has happened, all the fear and uncertainty, to end up here with you seems like a dream. If it is a dream, then I never want to wake, Aldrich replied, drawing her into his arms. They stood there for a long moment, simply holding each other, listening to the crackling of the fire and the wind howling outside the thick stone walls. Eventually, they settled together on the furs before the hearth, talking quietly about their plans for the future. Aldrich explained that he would need to remain at court for at least another month to complete his work with King Edward on the Scottish border defenses. During that time, they would need to maintain the fiction of their separate stations, meeting privately only when it was safe to do so. Once my business here is concluded, Aldrich said, we will travel north to my estates. I will introduce you as my wife, and we will make our home there. It will be a different life from what you have known at court, more isolated perhaps, but also more honest. My people are hardy and practical, less concerned with social hierarchies than with survival and loyalty. It sounds wonderful, Isolde said sincerely. I have spent my entire life in service to others, always conscious of my position and the limitations it imposed. The thought of being free to simply be myself, to be your wife without hiding or pretending, is more precious to me than all the riches in the kingdom. They talked long into the night, making plans and sharing dreams, until exhaustion finally claimed them both. They fell asleep in each other's arms before the dying fire, more content than either had ever been. The following weeks settled into a careful routine. By day, Isolde resumed her duties attending to Queen Margaret, while Aldrich spent long hours in council meetings and military planning sessions with the king. They were scrupulously proper in public, their interactions limited to brief formal exchanges that gave no hint of their true relationship. But at night, when the castle grew quiet and the corridors were empty, Isolde would slip through the shadows to Aldrich's chambers, and they would steal precious hours together before she returned to her own small room before dawn. Queen Margaret proved to be an invaluable ally, covering for Isolde's occasional absences and providing excuses when needed. She seemed to take genuine pleasure in the conspiracy, perhaps living vicariously through the young couple's happiness. More than once, Isolde caught the queen watching them with a wistful expression when they happened to be in the same room, and she understood that Queen Margaret was seeing in them the marriage she had always wished for herself. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the secret wedding, Isolde was helping the queen dress for an important court function when Queen Margaret suddenly turned to her with an unusually serious expression. "Isolde, there is something I must tell you," she said quietly. "Something that may affect you and Lord Aldrich significantly." Isolde felt a flutter of anxiety. "What is it, Your Majesty?" "I have been speaking with Edward about the succession," Queen Margaret said. "As you know, we have no living heir, and the question of who will inherit the throne after Edward's death has been a source of considerable tension at court. Various nobles have been positioning themselves or their children as potential successors, and the resulting power struggles have made the court a dangerous place. I understand, Your Majesty, but what does this have to do with me and Lord Aldrich?" Queen Margaret took Isolde's hands in hers. "Edward has been considering various options, and I have been urging him to think beyond the traditional noble families, to consider men of proven loyalty and capability, rather than those with the most prestigious bloodlines. I have suggested that Lord Aldrich would make an excellent choice as his successor." Isolde felt her breath catch. "Your Majesty, that is an incredible honor, but surely there are others with stronger claims to the throne. Lord Aldrich is a northern lord, respected certainly, but not of royal blood. Neither was the first king of this dynasty," Queen Margaret pointed out. "He seized the throne through force of arms and the support of powerful allies. What matters is not bloodline, but the ability to rule wisely and maintain the stability of the realm. Lord Aldrich has demonstrated both military prowess and political acumen. He is respected by the nobles and beloved by his own people. He would make a fine king." "Has the king agreed to this?" Isolde asked, her mind reeling at the implications. "Not yet," Queen Margaret admitted. "Edward is still considering various options, but I am working to convince him, and I believe I may succeed. However, there is a complication. If Edward does choose Lord Aldrich as his heir, there will be expectations regarding his marriage. The nobles will want him to wed someone of appropriate rank, someone who can bring political alliances and strengthen his claim to the throne." Isolde felt her heart sink as she understood what the queen was saying. "They will never accept me as queen, a former servant, with no noble blood or political connections. They would see it as an insult to the crown." "I will not lie to you and say it would be easy," Queen Margaret said. "There would be opposition, possibly even rebellion from some of the more traditional nobles. But Isolde, times are changing. The old certainties about blood and rank are being challenged. If you and Aldrich are willing to fight for your marriage, to stand together against those who would tear you apart, you could change the very nature of this kingdom." Before Isolde could respond, there was a knock at the door, and a page entered to announce that King Edward wished to see both Queen Margaret and Lord Aldrich in his private chambers immediately. The queen and Isolde exchanged worried glances, both wondering if this summons was related to their conversation. "Go and inform Lord Aldrich of the king's summons," Queen Margaret instructed Isolde, "and then wait in my sitting room. I have a feeling this meeting may concern matters that affect you as well." Isolde hurried through the castle to find Aldrich, her mind churning with anxiety and confusion. She found him in the practice yard, training with his men-at-arms. Even after weeks at court, he insisted on maintaining his fighting skills, sparring daily with anyone willing to face him. He was stripped to the waist despite the autumn chill, his muscular torso gleaming with sweat as he moved through a complex series of sword forms. Isolde paused for a moment to watch him, still amazed that this magnificent man was her husband. When Aldrich saw her, he immediately sheathed his sword and grabbed a linen shirt, pulling it on as he approached. "Isolde, what brings you here? Is something wrong?" She quickly relayed the king's summons. and she saw Aldrich's expression grow serious. "This is unusual," he said. "Edward rarely summons me to his private chambers. Our meetings are typically held in the council room with other advisors present. Did the Queen give any indication of what this might be about?" "She mentioned the succession," Isolde said carefully, aware that others might overhear. "But she did not elaborate. Lord Aldrich, I fear that our secret may have been discovered." Aldrich's jaw tightened, but he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "If that is the case, then we will face it together. I regret nothing, Isolde. Even if the king banishes me from court, exiles me from England itself, I would make the same choice again. You are worth any price." They made their way to the king's private chambers, where Queen Margaret was already waiting. A guard admitted them, and they found King Edward standing by a window, his back to them as he gazed out over the castle grounds. The room was warm, with a large fire burning in the hearth, but the atmosphere felt tense. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said, bowing. "You summoned me?" King Edward turned, and Isolde was surprised to see that his expression was not angry but thoughtful, almost troubled. "Lord Aldrich, yes. Please sit. You as well, Margaret. We have matters of great importance to discuss." They settled into chairs arranged near the fire, and King Edward remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back in a characteristic pose. "Lord Aldrich, you have served me well since your arrival at court. Your counsel on military matters has been invaluable, and your integrity has been proven beyond question, most notably in your pursuit of justice for Mistress Whitmore during the recent unpleasantness with Lady Beatrice." "I am honored by your Majesty's confidence," Aldrich replied carefully. "I am growing old," King Edward continued, "and I have no heir. This is a situation that cannot continue indefinitely. When I die, the kingdom will descend into chaos as various factions fight for the throne unless I make my intentions clear while I still have the authority to do so. I have been considering various candidates, weighing their strengths and weaknesses." He paused, fixing Aldrich with an intense stare. "Lord Aldrich Blackthorn, I am prepared to name you as my heir, to train you in the responsibilities of kingship, so that when my time comes, the transition will be smooth and the realm will remain stable. What say you to this proposal?" Isolde saw Aldrich's face go pale with shock. Even though Queen Margaret had warned them this might happen, hearing the actual offer from the king's lips was clearly overwhelming. Aldrich rose from his chair and knelt before Edward. "Your Majesty, I am profoundly honored, but I must confess that I am also deeply troubled. I am a warrior and a manager of estates, not a politician or a diplomat. The throne requires someone with skills I do not possess." "Skills can be learned," King Edward said. "What cannot be taught is integrity, courage, and genuine concern for the welfare of one's people. You possess all of these qualities in abundance. However, there is one matter we must address before I make this official. As my heir, you will need to make a politically advantageous marriage, one that will strengthen your claim and provide important alliances. I have been considering several options among the noble families." Aldrich remained kneeling, but Isolde saw his jaw clench with tension. "Your Majesty, there is something I must confess, something that may change your opinion of me and your generous offer." King Edward's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Aldrich reached into his tunic and withdrew the folded parchment that documented his marriage to Isolde. 3 weeks ago, I married Isolde Whitmore in a private ceremony witnessed by Queen Margaret and Father Benedict. I understand that this revelation may cost me your favor, but I cannot accept your offer while concealing such a significant truth. Isolde is my wife, and I will not set her aside for any reason, not even the throne of England." The silence that followed Aldrich's confession was absolute and suffocating. Isolde felt as though her heart had stopped beating as she watched King Edward's face, trying to read his reaction. The king's expression was unreadable, his dark eyes fixed on the parchment in Aldrich's outstretched hand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Edward took the document and unfolded it, reading the words that bound Aldrich and Isolde together as husband and wife. "You married a servant," King Edward said, his voice flat and emotionless. "A woman with no noble blood, no political connections, no dowry, and you did so in secret, without seeking my permission or counsel." "Yes, Your Majesty," Aldrich replied, still kneeling. "I married the woman I love, knowing full well the consequences of such a choice. I understand if you wish to withdraw your offer and banish me from court. I accept whatever judgment you deem appropriate." King Edward turned to Queen Margaret, who had remained silent throughout this exchange. "And you participated in this deception? You stood witness to this marriage and helped them keep it secret?" Queen Margaret rose from her chair, meeting her husband's gaze with surprising defiance. "I did, Edward, and I would do it again without hesitation. These two people love each other genuinely and completely. They deserve happiness, something that you and I have never known in our own marriage. I will not apologize for helping them find what we could not." The king's face flushed with anger, and for a moment Isolde feared he would explode with rage. But then something unexpected happened. The anger drained from Edward's expression, replaced by a deep weariness and something that might have been regret. He moved to his chair and sat heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 45 years. "You are right, Margaret," he said quietly. "We have never known love in our marriage. It was arranged for political convenience, and we have both suffered for it. I have been a poor husband to you, distant and cold, too consumed with matters of state to attend to the person who should have been my closest companion, and you have borne that neglect with grace and dignity, never complaining, always performing your duties as queen with honor." Queen Margaret seemed taken aback by this admission. "Edward, The king raised a hand to forestall her response. "Let me finish. I have been thinking a great deal about the future lately, about what kind of kingdom I wish to leave behind. For too long, we have been bound by rigid traditions and outdated notions of blood and rank. Perhaps it is time for change. Perhaps a king who married for love rather than politics would rule with more compassion and understanding than one who never knew such feelings." He turned his attention back to Aldrich and Isolde, studying them with renewed interest. "Lord Aldrich, rise. And Mistress Whitmore, or should I say Lady Blackthorn, come forward and stand beside your husband." Isolde moved on trembling legs to stand next to Aldrich, who had risen from his kneeling position. She slipped her hand into his, drawing strength from his presence as they faced the king together. "I will not withdraw my offer," King Edward said. "In fact, your marriage to Isolde, far from being a disqualification, may actually strengthen your claim to the throne. You have demonstrated that you value integrity and love above political expediency. These are qualities that will serve you well as king. However, you must understand that there will be opposition from the noble families. Many will see your marriage to a former servant as an insult to their status and a threat to the established order. I am prepared to face that opposition, Your Majesty," Aldrich said firmly, "but I will not do so alone. Isolde is my partner in all things, and together we will prove that worth is measured by character and capability, not by the accident of one's birth." King Edward nodded slowly. "Well spoken. Very well then. I will make the announcement at the winter feast, 3 weeks hence. Lord Aldrich Blackthorn will be named as my heir and successor, and his wife, Lady Isolde Blackthorn, will be recognized as his consort and future queen. Between now and then, we must prepare for the political fallout and ensure that we have sufficient support among the nobles to prevent any serious challenges to the succession." Over the following weeks, the castle buzzed with activity and speculation. King Edward began the delicate process of informing key nobles about his decision, carefully managing their reactions and securing their support through a combination of persuasion, promises, and subtle threats. Queen Margaret proved to be an invaluable ally in this effort, using her influence among the noble ladies to build a coalition of support for Isolde. Isolde herself found her life transformed overnight. She was moved from the servants' quarters to chambers befitting a lady of rank, adjacent to Aldrich's rooms in the East Tower. A staff of servants was assigned to attend to her needs, and she was provided with a wardrobe of fine gowns appropriate to her new station. The transition was overwhelming and sometimes uncomfortable, but Aldrich remained steadfast at her side, helping her navigate the complexities of noble life. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Several powerful lords made their displeasure known, arguing that the succession should go to someone of proven noble lineage. Lord Pembroke, one of the king's oldest advisors, was particularly vocal in his opposition, claiming that naming a northern lord married to a commoner would weaken the crown and invite rebellion. One evening, about a week before the winter feast, Isolde and Aldrich were summoned to a private meeting with King Edward and a small group of his most trusted advisors. The atmosphere in the council chamber was tense, with Lord Pembroke seated at the far end of the table, his face set in stern disapproval. Lord Aldrich, Lady Isolde, King Edward began, I have gathered you here to address some concerns that have been raised about the succession. Lord Pembroke, please share your objections so that they may be addressed openly. Lord Pembroke stood, his elderly frame still imposing despite his 70 years. Your Majesty, with all due respect, this decision is madness. The throne of England has always passed to those of royal or at least noble blood. To name a northern lord as your heir is questionable enough, but to accept his marriage to a woman of common birth as legitimate is to overturn centuries of tradition. The other noble families will see this as an insult, and there will be challenges to Lord Aldrich's authority the moment you are gone. I understand your concerns, King Edward replied calmly, but I would ask you to consider the alternative. If I do not name a clear successor, what do you think will happen when I die? Civil war, with various factions fighting for the throne, tearing the kingdom apart in the process. At least with Lord Aldrich, we have a capable leader with military experience and demonstrated loyalty to the crown. But his wife? Lord Pembroke protested. His wife, Queen Margaret interrupted, rising from her seat, is a woman of exceptional intelligence, courage, and integrity. She has proven herself capable of handling adversity with grace and dignity. She will make a far better queen than many noble women I could name, who have nothing to recommend them beyond their family connections. Isolde felt gratitude wash over her at the queen's staunch defense, but she knew that words alone would not be enough to convince the skeptics. She rose from her own seat, drawing all eyes to her. Lord Pembroke, she said, keeping her voice steady despite her nervousness, I understand your concerns about my background. I was born a servant, and for most of my life, I expected to remain one. But circumstances have given me an opportunity to serve this kingdom in a different capacity, and I intend to prove myself worthy of that trust. I may not have been raised in a noble household, but I have spent years observing the workings of court, learning from Queen Margaret's example of grace and dedication. I know that I will face opposition and criticism, but I am prepared to work tirelessly to earn the respect of the people and the nobility. Lord Pembroke studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You speak well, Lady Isolde, but pretty words are one thing. The reality of ruling is quite another. How will you handle the noble families who will refuse to acknowledge your authority? How will you respond to those who will see you as an upstart who married above her station? With patience, dignity, and unwavering commitment to the welfare of the kingdom, Isolde replied. I cannot change my origins, nor would I wish to deny them, but I can prove through my actions that I am worthy of the position I now hold, and I will not do so alone. Lord Aldrich and I are partners, and together we will face whatever challenges come our way. Aldrich stood and moved to stand beside Isolde, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. Lord Pembroke, I have fought on battlefields across this kingdom. I have faced enemies who sought to kill me, and I have emerged victorious because I never lost sight of what I was fighting for, the safety and prosperity of my people. I approach this new responsibility with the same dedication, and I am blessed to have a wife who shares my values and my vision for a better future. Lord Pembroke sat down slowly, shaking his head. Your Majesty, I still believe this is a mistake, but I can see that you are determined to proceed with this plan, and I am too old to fight battles I cannot win. I will not actively oppose the succession, but do not expect me to champion it either. That is all I ask, King Edward said. Neutrality is better than active opposition. And in time, I believe Lord Aldrich and Lady Isolde will prove themselves to even the most skeptical among us. The winter feast arrived with a flurry of preparation. The great hall was transformed with evergreen boughs, holly and mistletoe hanging from the rafters. Long tables were laden with roasted meats, fresh bread, honeyed cakes, and barrels of the finest wine and mead. Nobles from across the kingdom had been summoned to attend, and the castle was filled to capacity with guests, all eager to witness what promised to be a momentous announcement. Isolde dressed with special care that evening, choosing a gown of deep sapphire blue velvet embroidered with silver thread and patterns of stars and crescent moons. The dress had long fitted sleeves that ended in points over her hands, and the neckline was square and modest, edged with silver embroidery. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style with a silver circlet resting on her brow, and she wore a necklace of sapphires and diamonds that had been a wedding gift from Aldrich. When she looked at her reflection, she saw not the servant girl she had been, but a lady of rank and dignity. someone who might indeed one day be queen. Aldrich came to escort her to the feast, and when he saw her, his breath caught audibly. "You are breathtaking," he said, taking her hand and raising it to his lips. "Every day, I wonder how I became so fortunate as to call you my wife." "I am the fortunate one," Isolde replied, taking in his appearance. He wore a tunic of black velvet with silver embroidery, a heavy cloak of midnight blue lined with gray fur, and a wide leather belt with a silver buckle. His dark hair had been pulled back from his face, revealing the strong lines of his features, and he looked every inch the future king he was about to become. They made their way to the great hall together, where the assembled nobles rose and bowed as they entered. Isolde was acutely aware of the eyes following them, some curious, some approving, and some openly hostile. She kept her head high and her expression serene, channeling all the lessons Queen Margaret had taught her about maintaining composure in the face of scrutiny. King Edward and Queen Margaret were already seated at the high table on the dais, and places of honor had been reserved for Aldrich and Isolde beside them. As they took their seats, the hall gradually quieted, the assembled guests sensing that something significant was about to occur. King Edward rose from his throne, and absolute silence fell over the hall. "My lords and ladies," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room, "I thank you for gathering here tonight. We celebrate not only the winter season, but also the future of our kingdom. As many of you know, I have no living heir, and the question of succession has weighed heavily upon me. Tonight, I am prepared to announce my decision." He paused, allowing the anticipation to build. "I have chosen Lord Aldrich Blackthorn to be my heir and successor. He is a man of proven courage, military skill, and unwavering loyalty to the crown. He will be trained in the responsibilities of kingship, and when my time comes, he will assume the throne with my full blessing and support." There was a murmur of surprise from the assembled nobles, but King Edward was not finished. "Furthermore, I recognize and celebrate Lord Aldrich's marriage to Lady Isolde Blackthorn. Though she was not born into nobility, she has proven herself to be a woman of exceptional character and capability. She will stand beside her husband as his consort, and, in time, as your queen." The hall erupted in a mixture of applause and shocked whispers. Some nobles stood and cheered, genuinely pleased with the announcement, or at least politically savvy enough to show support. Others remained seated, their faces showing varying degrees of disapproval and concern. But the announcement had been made, and there was no taking it back now. Aldrich rose and bowed deeply to the king. "Your Majesty, I accept this responsibility with humility and determination. I vow to serve this kingdom faithfully and to rule with justice and compassion, and I am honored to have Lady Isolde at my side, for she is the finest person I have ever known." Isolde stood as well, her heart racing, but her voice steady as she addressed the assembly. "I am deeply grateful for the trust that His Majesty has placed in me and in my husband. I know that my path to this position has been unconventional, and I understand that there are those who doubt my worthiness. But I pledge to dedicate my life to serving this kingdom and its people with all the strength and wisdom I possess. I ask only for the opportunity to prove myself through my actions." Queen Margaret rose and embraced Isolde warmly, a gesture of support that carried significant weight. "Lady Isolde has been my faithful servant and friend for many years," she said to the assembly. "I know her heart, and I can attest to her integrity and her dedication. She will be a magnificent queen, and I am proud to stand with her." The feast continued long into the night, with music, dancing, and endless toasts to the health and prosperity of the king, and the future queen. Isolde found herself swept up in conversations with nobles who either genuinely welcomed her or were at least willing to give her a chance to prove herself. Some were kind, others merely polite, and a few were barely civil, but she handled each interaction with grace and dignity, never showing the nervousness she felt beneath the surface. As the evening wore on and the wine flowed freely, Aldrich drew Isolde aside for a moment of privacy in a quiet alcove near one of the great windows. Outside, snow had begun to fall, covering the castle grounds in a blanket of white that gleamed in the moonlight. "How are you holding up?" Aldrich asked, taking her hands in his. "This has been an overwhelming evening." "I am managing," Isolde replied with a tired smile. "Though I confess I will be relieved when we can retire to our chambers and leave all this ceremony behind." "Soon," Aldrich promised. "But first, I want to tell you how proud I am of you." The way you spoke to the assembly, the grace with which you have handled every interaction tonight. You are already proving yourself to be the queen this kingdom needs." Isolde leaned into his embrace, drawing comfort from his strength and warmth. "I could not do any of this without you, Aldrich. You are my anchor, my courage, my reason for believing that we can make this work despite all the obstacles we will face. We will face them together," Aldrich said, kissing her forehead gently. "Always together. That is the promise I made to you when we married, and it is a promise I will keep for the rest of my life." As they stood there in the quiet alcove, watching the snow fall and listening to the distant sounds of the feast continuing in the great hall, Isolde felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The journey that had brought her to this moment had been long and difficult, filled with trials that had tested her strength and her faith in herself. She had been falsely accused, imprisoned, and nearly destroyed by those who wished her harm. But she had survived, and more than that, she had triumphed. She thought of her mother, who had taught her that service was an honorable profession and that dignity could be maintained regardless of one's station in life. She wished her mother could see her now, could know that her daughter would one day be queen, not through manipulation or political maneuvering, but through genuine love and the recognition of her own worth. "What are you thinking about?" Aldrich asked, sensing her contemplative mood. "My mother," Isolde replied, "and how she would have been proud of me, not because I am to be queen, but because I have remained true to the values she taught me. She always said that integrity was more valuable than gold, and that love was the greatest treasure one could possess. I have found both in you, Aldrich, and together we will build a kingdom where such values are celebrated rather than scorned." "That is a beautiful vision," Aldrich said, "and one I share completely. We will face opposition, certainly. There will be nobles who never accept you, who will spend years trying to undermine your authority and prove that a commoner has no place on the throne. But we will persevere, Isolde. We will prove them wrong through our actions, through our dedication to justice and the welfare of all our subjects, not just the privileged few." As midnight approached, King Edward called for one final toast. The assembly gathered in the great hall, raising their goblets high as the king spoke words that would echo through the history of the kingdom. "To Lord Aldrich and Lady Isolde Blackthorn," he proclaimed, his voice ringing with authority and conviction. "May their reign be long and prosperous, and may they lead this kingdom into a new era of justice, compassion, and unity. May they remember always that true nobility is measured not by the circumstances of one's birth, but by the content of one's character. And may their love for each other serve as an example of the bonds that make us strong, the connections that transcend all boundaries of rank and station." "To Lord Aldrich and Lady Isolde," the assembly responded, their voices joining together in a chorus that filled the hall. Isolde looked around at the sea of faces, some friendly, some neutral, some still skeptical, but she was no longer afraid. She had Aldrich beside her, Queen Margaret's unwavering support, and most importantly, she had faith in herself and in the rightness of their cause. The road ahead would not be easy, but it would be worth traveling. As the winter feast finally came to an end and the guests began to disperse to their chambers, Isolde and Aldrich made their way through the castle to their rooms in the east tower. The corridors were quiet now, lit only by the occasional torch, and their footsteps echoed softly on the stone floors. When they reached their chambers and closed the door behind them, shutting out the world and all its demands, Aldrich pulled Isolde into his arms and held her close. "We did it," he said softly. "We survived the trial. We married despite all the obstacles, and now we stand on the threshold of a future that neither of us could have imagined just a few short months ago." "We did it together," Isolde corrected, looking up at him with eyes full of love. "And that is how we will face everything that comes next. Together, as partners, as equals, as husband and wife. Whatever challenges await us, we will overcome them because we have each other." Aldrich kissed her then, a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, all the love and devotion that bound them together more surely than any crown or title ever could. And as they stood there in the warmth of their chambers, with the snow falling softly outside and the future stretching before them like an unwritten page, Isolde knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, not as a servant or even as a future queen, but simply as herself, loved and cherished for exactly who she was. The young woman who had once been banished from her position through false accusations had risen above injustice to claim a destiny beyond her wildest dreams. And though the king had discovered the truth too late to prevent her suffering, he had discovered it in time to set things right, to acknowledge that true worth transcends all boundaries of birth and rank. In the end, justice had prevailed, love had triumphed, and a new chapter in the history of the kingdom had begun, written by two people who dared to believe that a better world was possible.